In Unit 15, Part 2, we're going to talk about writing and solving proportions. I'm going to show you 2 ways to solve proportions in this part, and then in Part 3, we'll look at the way that you'll probably line it. So quickly, let's just review. In Part 1, we talked about ratios. Ratios are 2 quantities that are compared by division. Remember, we can write ratios in 3 ways. We can use the word 2, we can use a colon, or we can write them as a fraction. All of those ways to write ratio. A rate, if you remember, is a ratio that compares 2 quantities with different units that are measured in different units. And then a unit rate is when we have the denominator of 1. So in Part 2, we're now talking about proportions. There's a definition for you here that I just touched there on the book and pasted. It says a proportion is an equation that states 2 ratios are equal. So here's your example in numbers. Okay? 2/3 equals 8/12. Okay? So its 2 ratios are equal. So we have 2 fractions with an equal sign in the middle. That makes a proportion. Okay? Important thing to notice right here from the algebra example is that the denominators can't be 0. If the denominator is 0, it's not going to work. So if you look, it says solving a proportion using equivalent ratios. So this is our first method for solving proportions. So our proportion is 5/6 equals x over 36. And I'm just writing it again to give myself some more room. So equivalent ratios method says I do 6 times what to get 36? So I do 6 times 6 to get 36, which means if I do 5 times 6, I'll get my numerator. So I get x equals 30. So that's the equivalent ratio method. So looking at the next one, I have 10 over t equals 90 over 54. So you can think of this one as multiplication from left to right, or division from right to left, whatever way you want to do it. But if you think about it, 10 times what gives me 90? So 10 times 9 gives me 90. And then I have to think, what number is t going to be so that when I multiply it by 9, I get 54. So t would be 6. T would be 6, because 6 times 9 is 54. So that's our first method, is using equivalent ratios. Our second method is solving a proportion using algebra, which ties into what we've done in the past with solving equations, and what we did pretty recently with solving with multiplicative inverses. So I have my proportion, 1/50 equals 5/10. So the algebra way to do this is just to think I need to solve for y. Since I'm doing division on the left side, I'm going to multiply, because that's the inverse operation, and I just multiply by my denominator. So these 50s cancel out. I get y equals, and then if you remember what we did a couple minutes ago, I can simplify 10 to 1 and 50 to 5, so 5 times 5 is 25. Looking at our next example, we have 13 over 2 equals x over 4. Okay. I'm trying to solve for x. I go over to the right side, I have division, so my opposite operation, or my inverse operation, would be to multiply by 4. On the right side, the 4's cancel, and I just get x. Over here, I can simplify. 4 becomes 2, 2 becomes 1, 2 times 13 is 26. So that's what equals 26. So our first method is equivalent ratios. One, we multiply the top one numerator to get the other numerator, one denominator to the other denominator. Second way is to use algebra, which is we multiply by the inverse in order to get the variable by itself. Okay, so those are our 2 ways to solve from this part. The bottom of the page has your review problems. Make sure you get those review problems done. Okay, if you need help, just ask me. On the back side, we have a couple word problems. It says, in 2003, the exchange rate between the United States and Belgium was 140 Belgian francs to 4 US dollars. So I'm going to go ahead and underline those important numbers and words. You have 120 US dollars to exchange. How many Belgian francs can you get in exchange? So I need to set up a proportion to solve this. I'm going to start with my first rate, which is 140 Belgian francs to 4 US dollars. And notice I said rate because they're two different units. Now that's going to be equal to something over 120 US dollars. We're trying to figure out how many francs that's going to be equal to. Okay, so I can rewrite this 140 over 4 equals x over 120. So if you notice, I wrote it with the units at first, and then I wrote it without the units. And I can use either method to figure this out. I'm going to use equivalent ratios. So 40 times 30 is 120. So that means I need to do 140 times 30 to solve for x. So when I do that, I'll get 4,200, and that's going to be in francs. 4,200 francs. I could have used the algebra method if I wanted to. Number 2 on the word problems, I'm going to leave for you guys this week.